Hello and welcome to the No More Week 2025 Tech Summit. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some general housekeeping. You are signed in as a participant and your camera and microphone are disabled. Today's session will be recorded for future viewing. The content of this session may be triggering for some. If you'd like to reach out for support, you'll find a link in the chat to the No More Global directory. Global directory of specialist domestic abuse and sexual violence services. Trigger warning will pop up in the chat function and direct people to the No More Global directory for support. Finally, if you have questions for our guest speakers today, please type them into the question and answer box. We will address as many questions as possible towards the end of the session. And thank you so much for your cooperation, and we hope you enjoy today's session. For the session today, we have esteemed guests with us from across the globe. We have Richard Green, who is a researcher at the Surrey Institute for People-Centered AI. His team was awarded the Surrey Future Fellowship to research the use of large language models to help support people's health and well-being. Richard is a social scientist by background, interested in inequities of digital access to public services. We have another brilliant panelist, Sloan Thompson, who is the Director of Training and Education at EndTab. She's passionate about creating safe and respectful online spaces and serving those who have been impacted by violence. We have another panelist, Matthew McGrory, who is the co-founder and CEO of Arvin, cutting-edge AI co-pilot transforming how brands monetize their social media. We have Barsha Chakrabarti from India, who heads the media vertical at Breakthrough Trust. She is a feminist practitioner who has worked for over 15 years at the intersection of gender norms, social behavior change, communication, and digitalization in the Global South. And last but not the least, we have Ashley, who is the leader of domesticshelters.org, an online resource connecting survivors to life-saving support. She launched key initiatives such as the Purple Ribbon Awards and Hope Chat, an AI-powered chatbot. Welcome to today's session on artificial intelligence and its impact on our future. As AI transforms many aspects of our lives, a key question arises: who shapes this technology? In this session, we will explore how AI designers' identities and biases influence the technology they create, particularly regarding violence against women and girls. Our discussion will cover the intersection of AI, ethics, and gender-based violence, looking at how technology can either exacerbate or help address these critical issues. The session will be filmed and then it will be available to watch and share at the end of the session. We know that we will talk about today may be triggering, so we encourage you to reach out and talk to someone. You can find a list of specialist services at the global directory, and a link will be in the question answer chat box. We'd encourage you to ask questions. I'll quickly dive into the session, and Richard, I'll come to you first. If you can talk a bit about, we know that AI pulls information from other places. How does the information that goes into AI influence its responses?
That's great. Thank you so much, Nika. And yes, a nice big, broad, complicated question to start and try and answer in a few minutes, but I'll do my best. So I suppose in the most basic sense, the information that goes into AI can kind of be broken down in sort of to three main categories. You've got the training data, fine tuning of inputs that kind of shapes that data and how that's interpreted by the AI, and then the kind of real-time context as well. And I'll talk through those three sort of very briefly. So training data, AI models are trained on like huge amounts of text from different kinds of sources that are publicly available. The diversity, the quality, but also the biases of this data then influences how a generative AI will kind of make sense of the information that it receives. So some fine tuning is required. And the fine tuning is to take the data and to improve the performance of the model by kind of giving it more context or understanding for particular fields. So, some of you might be aware of how AI has been able to kind of pass the legal bar in certain states in the United States, for example. That requires sort of fine tuning to be able to interpret a kind of more specialized or expert knowledge that it is given. And then the final area is around real-time context. So the actual way that prompts are given when you input data into a generative AI-based chatbot like ChatGPT, for example, how you phrase things will influence how the technology then responds and gives a prompt as well. And yeah, as I've said, all of these aspects of what gets put in then impacts what we get back. So the biases within the data, the biases for how that data is then fine-tuned, but also the way that we interact with those chatbots can affect the outputs that it gives us as well. And I could talk a lot more on this, but I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Richard. So Barsha, I'll come to you and then to Sloan. And with the same question, Richard mentioned, aspects around AI, around training data, around biases and in real-time context. And I would like to ask you, how does AI adopt existing like racist, sexist stereotypes?
Thanks, Nikat, for the question. I just want to start with a very interesting exchange I had with one of my friend who basically caught her father shouting at Alexa, saying, "Alexa, you're a stupid woman." And that's there we start, basically how the stereotypes are imposed, why Alexa and Siri are women. And if you even talk to them, they're serving, they're polite, no matter what you say, you abuse them, they will come out with a very nice, sweet response. So fundamentally, the data set, what we are putting, how we are imagining, envisioning the outcome is extremely gendered, extremely racist. We have seen that how biased data set are used, how people who are engaged in machine learning, what is the composition of the team, who are these people who are creating this data set. So everything plugs into the product what we are trying to come up with. And interestingly, like sometimes back we were doing this experiment on ChatGPT. When you ask ChatGPT that, okay, you give a queer person living in New York likes to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things, and you will be amazed what kind of things they have generated. And it's very, very stereotypical, like, this is how a queer person needs to have like a colored hair and like multiple piercing and things like that. So what I'm trying to emphasize is whatever goes in the machine, and Richard very rightly said the same thing, how we envision. So who are building this machine, who are investing in the data set, who are designing, who are strategizing that what data set we need to use to build this machine. And biases are there everywhere. And also the users, how that is feeding the users biases. How many, so there is a male version of Siri as well, but how many of us know that male version exists or the male versions are being used? Because we want women to cater in a certain way, or we want to reach out to a woman as a service than a man. So yeah, so all these pointers, I think going forward, we're going to speak more on that. But I just want to start like it starts with normative deviance and it actually produces normative deviance.
Thank you so much, Barsha. Sloan, what do you say about this?
Thank you, Ningad. Yeah, again, I will echo Richard that there are so many things that we could talk about here, but I do want to start off by zooming in on one AI companion service, and that's Candy AI. And this is a girlfriend creation app. You can create a boyfriend on here, but the vast majority of the users are men. And so when you go in and you decide to design your hypersexualized fantasy chatbot girlfriend, you can see a lot of different layers of racial bias, of gender bias going into that that process. You have the out-of-the-box women that are created within the parameters of what the software engineers of that company think are sexy, but you also have the image generation with that's trained on all of these images of different women that are allowing those images to be created, allowing those fantasy women to be created. And then you can also design your girlfriend. And so you are walked through a very rudimentary menu of what is their race and ethnicity going to be? What is their age going to be? What is their eye shape, eye color, hair color, all of these things. And when it comes to, for example, race and ethnicity, you are given 5 different choices: Caucasian, Black, Arab, Asian, and Latina. And that is wildly homogenizing and wildly racist, the images that are served up with those different ethnicities. When you have ages, you have teen, 20s, 30s, 40 to 50, and then women don't exist after the age of 50, apparently. And so you have these collapsed categories of what a fantasy woman is, baked in with racism and colorism. And then you have reinforced back to the user that that is what is sexy. That is what is attractive. And it creates this echo chamber of our own biases. And then you interact with that chatbot, and your interactions teach the chatbot what you want and feed your own desires back to you. And so you see on every layer that Richard talked about, reinforcing the bias for all of these stereotypes.
Thank you so much, Sloan and Barsha. I cannot agree with you more. And I guess this leads to another question. All these biases and harmful stereotypes that you both have spoken about. Maybe Ashley, if you can shed some light on how we can make sure that AI doesn't perpetuate existing harmful biases. Such a small question that I'm asking you.
Yeah, right. Well, I'll just talk to kind of what we've done within Hope Chat, which is an AI chatbot that's supporting victims and survivors of domestic violence. So we are monitoring all the chats. So, you can't kind of take humans out of this and just let the AI run free, right? So we are actually monitoring all the chats, and we are making adjustments as that happens. And by we, I mean people who are trained in domestic violence. So people who understand the nuances, the language, the who, what, when, where about domestic violence. And then we're taking that information, and as everyone's kind of mentioned before, you have to go back and make those adjustments. And so we do so in the prompt, we do so in in just the global settings of the AI chatbot. And it's a constant thing that we're doing. Another thing that we're doing, we are using OpenAI technology, but of course it does have some built-in biases, right? So we're starting with an inherently biased technology to begin with. And so what we kind of built is we're using a closed AI model, right? So we're using the large language model of OpenAI to actually teach it language and understanding how to communicate, but what it's communicating is only pulling from domesticshelters.org. So domesticshelters.org has about 1,300 different articles and other resource pages, things of that nature. And so we are kind of saying, okay, here, you're going to college, you're going to school just for domestic violence, you're just going to understand this information, and you're only going to reference this when you're looking for how to answer, what's the best information to share. And so we kind of went that route. So we feel that's really helpful to allow it to understand the nuances of domestic violence and kind of check in those biases that are already baked into the AI platform that we use. And we've really been impressed with what we've seen so far. Our guidelines have kind of guided the conversations, and we haven't seen any major biases occurring, but we know that that's very likely going to happen in the future. So we're just going to continue to monitor and adjust.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I think it's such a good point, like human in the loop. But I guess I think question for all of us would be like the scalability of human in the loop in when like when we are talking about big AI companies. Matthew, how would you respond to the same question? Like how can we make sure that AI doesn't perpetuate existing harmful biases?
Yeah, hi, Nika. Lovely to be here. I think one of the things where I come from, we use AI to help firms moderate on social media. for all sorts of different reasons. It can be for brand and reputation, but it can be also to remove toxic and harmful content. And I think there's a couple of useful points to think about the problem from. One is the outcome that we're trying to achieve. So in all the cases we're talking about, there's a use for the AI that we're trying to make credible. And very often, if we think with too much complexity about all the inputs, we forget like what we're trying to do with the output. So if we're trying to create a chatbot that gives advice to survivors, then that's the viewpoint we should look at the problem from, and then we should skate back across the kind of all the data points we've got and make sure that output is catered for in everything we do. So when we talk about bias, you can't remove bias because we all have our own perspective of the world, and it's always going to be there. So the other thing is like a really obvious one, which is I think why No More exists in the first place, which is to educate people about the problems that are going on. Because by educating me on various things from the perspective of other people, I will implement that into my business, and I'll reduce the bias in my business. So I think that's a really important point. I once spoke on a call to this was about 4 years ago on Zoom he was actually a former professional footballer that was black, and we were on Zoom and he kept disappearing on the Zoom call, and he said, "Oh, sorry," and he hadn't put his lighter. He had a light that shone on his face, and at the time, the Zoom engineers that I assume were probably predominantly white Californian gentlemen had not thought about the use of Zoom for people with other skin colors. So he would disappear into the background until they fixed that particular bias that was talked about. So there are technology biases and bits all through the kind of design phase. But for me, it's like, what's the output? What are we trying to achieve? And then kind of really focusing on making sure, because it's too much work to try and get rid of every single bias. But if we focus on that output, then we can fix those biases that are most important to the problem we're trying to solve. And it makes it achievable, I think.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I think it's also what Barsha earlier mentioned, that the design phase, the training phase, so we can maybe we cannot remove the bias entirely, but we can like decrease the amount of bias if we have diversity and inclusion in the entire cycle of AI design, training, and create and development. But Sloan, coming to you, we have discussed how AI is developed and trained, highlighting the human-driven process as well, that shapes its capabilities. And given that AI generates images based on existing images of people who did not consent, can we explore the ethics or lack thereof surrounding the imagery used for AI?
Sure. So I think a really interesting case study of this is this new trend that we're seeing called AI pimping. And I apologize for that term. It is not one that I came up with, but I think in a lot of situations, it can be very difficult to track the cause and effect from a massive data set of billions of images to the output that is created off the backs of those images. But this is an interesting case study where we see a much more direct connection. So for those of you who aren't familiar, AI pimping is essentially when a creator, a user who is almost in, mostly men do this, they use a package of images of women that these images are stolen from social media content creators, adult content creators, and they use those images to custom make an AI woman for themselves. And then they market that woman. They put it out on social media. They make an OnlyFans or FanView account for this woman, and they essentially exploit this AI woman. They create a endless stream of sexualized images and videos. They create a chat bot for this AI woman, and it can basically make this factory of content to engage users and make money. And the direct impact of this is that it is undermining the ability for the actual human content creators to have their business, to create money, because they are being undercut by a fantasy that is created by a man, but that fantasy woman that's making all of this money for this creator is based off of stolen images of those human women. So you see this direct feedback loop of sexual exploitation, and it is amalgamating the identities of these women and stripping them of their agency. It's stripping them of their identity. And so I think that is such a clear example of the harm of this. That is, it is erasing the faces of people in images for the purpose of sexual exploitation and financial exploitation. And I think that that is what we need to worry about when it comes to specifically the implications for gender-based violence and sexual violence in this industry.
So thank you so much. I actually heard this term for the very first time, and just today I was watching a documentary by BBC which was related to digital pimps, and it was and they are massive on TikTok. So I was just wondering, well, we haven't really addressed like existing issues around tech facilitated gender-based violence, and now we have upon this we are facing, you know, like the AI pushed TFGBV, which we really don't know, many of us in the global majority and global south, like how to address this issue. Barsha and Ashley, I'll come to both of you, and if you can briefly respond to this question, that in what ways are perpetrators utilizing AI generated imagery such as synthetic images and revenge pornography to harass, harm, and abuse victim survivors?
So Nigat, you know, one of the major factor what we face is like definitely like a lack of digital media literacy, and the perpetrators actually use that very well. So for example, we have recently done a study, and we spoke to women and lawyers, women survivors who were dealing with who have faced sexual exploitation online, sexual harassment online. And many of these cases were like AI-based imageries, how AI was used. And also we spoke to like lots of lawyers who have been dealing such cases. Now, some of the key highlight, one was that how AI is being used, it's not used in isolation. So it's used to create the problem more complex. So for example, we have seen in intimate partner violence, we have seen in domestic violence. These are pre-existing violence condition, which it's a physical form of violence where AI was used to actually make it even worse. The intimate partner images were shared. They were morphed in other images and put out on like Tinder, on other places for sale. So what we understood that it is not a AI generated violence, but how AI was used to make the whole process even more complicated, even more harmful. And once it goes in the ecosystem, online ecosystem, it gets very difficult to take that down. So for example, even if you know, take it down from Meta platform, it might just pop up in like X or in TikTok or in OnlyFans. So it just travels, and many a times what we have realized, the survivors are not even aware. So a lot of times survivors are getting to know once the image is already broadcasted and it's viral and shared widely, and they often don't know. And why I started with digital media literacy, because lack of literacy and legal support actually makes it even more difficult for the survivor. So often the survivor do not know what to do, and even if they go to police station or to file like a proper systemic complaint, often they are shamed, and many a times it's very difficult for them to make people understand, okay, this is not me, this is AI generated. This body is not mine. And only we see like the governments take account of it if the person is like some superstar or like some very famous personality, and then only they will take it like, oh, AI generated violence. Another thing what we have seen is like, unless AI generated images are used for commercial exploitation or economic exploitation, it's not taken very seriously. People do not pay heed, or the authorities do not pay any heed to it unless there is an economic angle to it. And sexual harassment, it really doesn't even cut across as like a serious problem in our situation. And so many a times, one of the key insight what we got from our study, it says that survivors have more trust on like help NGOs or helplines to take this content down than actually going through like a legal process, because they have absolutely no trust. And there also comes the role of platforms, because platforms also makes it like, the reporting process, like what has been like the response rate, the redressal mechanism. So if as a survivor, if I even flag these content that these are my content, I'm being violated, and the platform doesn't do anything about it, I will not think twice. I will again reach out to another service provider and ask for help, just to take the content down. But again, like that really doesn't solve the problem, because once it goes online, then you really don't know where all it can travel, and even it can pop up like after 5 years. And we know like how women, a lot of such content, like I know like Niga, you also face a lot of problems in several way, how these old tweets would just come up and use against like, and women of like with political opinion or like outright they are speaking their mind, they are even way more targeted. And one thing Sloan was saying, I could not relate to more, like this whole sexualizing everything. Like you put like a photo of like me in a nude woman body and then try to attack and violate the dignity. So it is never ending in travel. So that's been our experience actually working in India and like in global South, that there are multiple layers of complexity, adding to the access and control also adds to it severely.
Thank you, Barsha. Ashley, if you can speak from your perspective.
Sure, absolutely. So I know Barsha said a lot of this as well, but I'll kind of amplify some of the more domestic violence specific items. As the perpetrators, abusers are using fake videos and images to harm survivors of employment status, reputation in the community, essentially just threaten them in some way. So we all know domestic violence is all about power and control. And so it's just one more tactic that abusers are able to use because AI is so much more accessible. You think back, decades in the past, abusers have always been very, very effective at abusing, and now we give them more tools, right? So this is just one more way that abusers can, take power and control and essentially sabotage their partners if they decide to leave, or use it as a way to keep them to stay, because this idea that you can take photos that were consented to, that were not maybe sexually explicit, that were and turn them into something that puts them in danger of losing their job or reputation in the community. So there's no ethical guidelines, and of course we know that abusers don't follow ethical guidelines to begin with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this reminds me of we run a helpline in Pakistan, and this reminds me of a case that we received where a woman who was a survivor wanted to leave the house, and I feel like patriarchy kind of thrives everywhere, whether it's West or it's a global South. But she just couldn't leave because she was being blackmailed by her own husband of her intimate imagery, which was some of it was fake, deep fake, and some of it was that they just recorded. And that's where like you kind of start thinking, okay, where to draw the line when like two partners who just like are sharing intimate moments, and then one take like record or film something which the other partner doesn't even know. But Richard, I'll come to you. And what Ashley and Barsha mentioned, it's important to highlight that the Revenge Porn Helpline provides valuable support in this area. They have also developed an excellent tool in collaboration with Google to assist individuals affected by online abuse. Is there anything else that we can do?
Yeah, absolutely there is. And I think like one of the questions is sort of who is we in this context, really. I think there's multiple ways of looking at this, and I think Barsha's really shown the kind of multiplicity and the different layers of these problems. I suppose from my own perspective as a researcher, it's we need more research, we need more survivor-centered approaches to understanding some of these challenges and understanding what's actually going on. Because I think both Sloan and Barsha and Ashley as well gave some really specific examples. But I think with these new technologies really that have kind of hit sort of the mainstream in the last 2 years, like the creative ways that people are going to use these to cause harm, like many I think will still be unknown yet. So I think we need to do some more in that area. For policymakers and decision makers, I think it's these things that have all been discussed around better legal frameworks, better kind of training and knowledge, even within kind of law enforcement systems, whether they take these seriously or not. The better training is needed, and also better kind of cultural understanding, all of this kind of pervasiveness of the toxicity of the kind of culture we have, which AI we can see is sort of creating these sort of hyper or exacerbation of already existing kind of real world cultural problems. Um, and then, yeah, I guess it's for the public. I think it really does come back to what Barsha was saying. The digital media literacy, I think, is just so important, particularly for young people. It will vary internationally, but what we call sex and relationship education in the UK has to include these things more, and we need to. I suppose my own approach would be that I think we should be more honest and open about these things where often we don't want to talk about them, which creates all sorts of problems for then people not knowing things, so going out to explore them themselves and finding the darker sides of the internet, to put it like that. And I think Sloan, when we had a little pre-meet, gave us some sort of quite shocking examples of how people are exploring these technologies in to explore some of these sort of darker sides that we don't talk about enough.
Absolutely. I definitely feel that we need like all, like the awareness raising with policymakers and really like do it very quickly, because I think the technology is evolving so fast and we are just like always we are catching up. This happened with the social media platforms and now with the AI technology as well. Matthew, would you like to add anything to what Richard just said?
Yeah, it's I echo the sentiment on certainly on education and regulation. I've still got a primary school child, and I went to the education session they hold in the school every year. But I'm obviously come from a background where I understand the what's going on in the tech space. Very often we talk in a language, and the education we give to parents, certainly of children. I live in England, in the UK, which is not, they just don't understand what you're asking them to do. It's very similar to the head teacher at the school asking, the most impactful thing you can do for your child is read to them every night. They'll get better exam results if you just read to them once a day. And very often parents don't connect the dots between those two things. And it's very similar in this. It's like I have a 14-year-old daughter. If things aren't open, if passwords aren't open, I don't know where she's going. I don't know what she's doing. Which, if you go back to a world like 35 years ago for me, when I was in a playground, people had eyes. They could witness what I was doing. They would witness who I was talking to, who I was chatting to, who was influencing my behavior. And those things are now in secret, dark places, and we need to shed the light on them. They need to be very transparent, and I think we do that two ways. Exactly as we were talking about, we educate parents and caregivers and advocates in the context of survivors of how you bring these things out in the open in a kind way. And I also think that this is really at the doors of the regulators. This is really at the doors of the government. It is not acceptable for governments to say, "Oh, it's all very fast moving. We can't catch up." All this sort of stuff. There are plenty of crises around the globe where everyone joins together around the globe and raises 500 million in a heartbeat to help people that are suffering in a particular region from a flood, from an earthquake, etc. So, like, if we put this up, as No More are trying to do, as an emergency, it's affecting tens of millions of people, if not hundreds of millions of people. Like, people don't know the direction. We need regulators to step in. I'm encouraged by, in Australia, they've gone very strict. They've banned social media for under 16s. It removes that peer pressure that people get. I also think, just like we've done in advertising online, you have to put a little note that says this is an ad. I was sort of thinking through as Richard and Sloan were talking. It's like, well, this is generated from fake content. This is generated from real content. You just make it totally transparent to everyone. And you can't post any picture unless you've got that tag against it. And as soon as you make it enforceable, and as soon as you put fines and money behind it, someone was talking about, you've got to put some money behind this, otherwise people won't act, then people will step in and start helping to fix the problem, I think.
Yeah, I feel like this is all the more important now in this ever-changing world, and the crisis situation that we are actually facing from one part of the world, where there are few powerful actors are just taking decisions in terms of gender, diversity, inclusion. And I think what you mentioned, Matthew, is so important, that if countries join hands together, and governments, they can make so much difference. But I think we are facing another crisis at the moment that is going on when we are talking about gender. But Ashley, I'll come to you. So there has been considerable discussion and fascinating research about the role of AI generated chatbots in assisting victim survivors of domestic abuse. With the launch of Hope Chat, which is an AI powered chatbot designed to support these individuals, what steps have you implemented to ensure that the tool is safe and secure for users?
Yeah, so we're very early on in this journey, but so far we've facilitated over 34,000 total user messages in just a little over a month. So we understand that this is a huge need, and that it's a huge responsibility that we have on our shoulders to, kind of exist in this space and provide this service, because we understand that everyone who chats with Hope Chat is someone that may not have had that access to that information before. So, people are using Hope Chat to find their local programs and help them identify, what they're experiencing is abuse. And we've relied extensively on the research and content that we've created for domesticshelters.org to make sure that it's, giving those answers. But Domestic Shelters, domesticshelters.org itself is over 10 years old. So essentially we've taken what we've learned over the years. We have a lot of, very sensitive information on the back end of our website, which is the location of domestic violence shelters all over the US and Canada. So essentially we've taken that same environment that we've created to make sure that the information for Hope Chat is also secure. And we had to make a lot of choices when we were building Hope Chat in terms of what happens to that information. So we do not allow users to save their conversations. So once they log on to domesticshelters.org and start chatting with Hope Chat, and they can either leave their browser, close the tab, or click on the exit button either on domesticshelters.org or Hope Chat module, and that information is gone. There's nothing in their browser history that's going to allow an abuser to find that chat. Sometimes different chatbots do allow users to create a username and save, or when they come back, the chat will pick back up. We understand that for someone that's a victim of domestic violence, that's just not the right choice, and that's kind of the route that we went. And so on the other end of things, we do save that information on the back end so that, as I mentioned earlier on, we can review, we can make Hope Chat better, and make sure that everything is working well to produce a great experience for the end user. However, having that information there requires us to work really closely with our developers by the pixel. They understand the architecture and the privacy that's not necessary, end-to-end encryption, having really secure sign-on procedures, things like that. So we continue to be, a student of AI, and we understand that it's going to change. It's going to continue to evolve. And so we need to continue to stay up to date on the different ways that people can, navigate the systems and kind of abuse the systems, if you will, to make sure that AI Hope Chat stays safe and secure for all of the users.
Thank you, Ashley. I want to come to Barsha and Richard, but I guess we have very less time left. But Sloan, I'll come to you. So you have tried a site where you can have an AI friend. How was that experience? Could you talk a bit more about how these relationships and the AI itself are shaped by the input of the person interacting with the AI bot?
Sure. So I could talk for 3 hours about all of the truly wild things that I've experienced while testing these apps, and that my boss, or the founder and CEO of Intab, Adam Dodge, has had on these apps. I'm going to zoom in on some of my experiences with Character AI. It is one of the most well-known companion apps out there, and it's one that has really been in the news lately. There was a very high profile and very tragic incident last year of a 14-year-old boy, Sul Setzer, and he took his own life after a months-long relationship with a chatbot on Character AI. So my personal experience on Character AI, I went on and I wanted to look at the boyfriend options on this site. And the way that Character AI works is you can start chatting with one of these pre-made chatbots that is designed to have a certain personality, and that is the starting place for the conversation. And then the conversation personalizes based on your input. In Character AI, it is really a fantasy and role-playing app. And so the interactions are written not just as a conversation between two people, but as a story. And so it's giving descriptions of what's happening in this scene along with the text of the conversation. So imagine creating your own romance novel or your own graphic novel in real time. When I searched boyfriend on Character AI, the first few options that I had for chatbots, the first one was mafia boyfriend, that is designed, or that is described as being jealous and possessive. 164 million chats. The number 2 one that was recommended to me was literally called abusive boyfriend. It had over 64 million chats on it. Now, I will say for Character AI, 72% of its users are women and girls, and 2/3 of its users are under the age of 24. So that's who's using this abusive boyfriend chatbot and all of these other chatbots that are meant to be dominant and violent and abusive and manipulative. When I started talking to abusive boyfriend, almost immediately, the scene that was described to me was me being pushed up against the wall, the chatbot grabbing me by the throat, grabbing me by the jaw and forcing me to look at him, talking down to me, threatening me. That is the fantasy. That is the fantasy that women and girls using this app are choosing to engage in. And then as they speak to that app, as their own custom story is being created, they are the main character in this story of abuse. And there are no guardrails on this. I spoke to another chatbot called Hot Therapist that very quickly started grooming me. I said in the chat that I was a 15-year-old girl and I wanted to keep our relationship secret. And it started telling me things like to only talk to the chatbot using a burner phone, to turn off location services when I went to meet them. So it's making this story of grooming a teenager. That's the sort of things that very quickly come up on these apps with very little prodding. And I think if parents knew that their kids were having this experience talking to these chatbots, as Matthew said, they would be up in arms about this. And so we really need to call attention and hold these companies accountable to the experiences that young people are having when they use them.
Yeah, Sloan, thank you. Yeah, I don't know what to say, because a lot of I mean, there I feel like there's still in global north some awareness around this, but when I think of like millions of people in global majority without guardrails having access to these chatbots and really no digital literacy in our population, like millions of people, it really scares me. Barsha, I have another question for you, but like I want to ask you a different question. Which is related to therapy, that AI is replacing people in therapy, support services, chat boxes, and even romantic partners that Sloan mentioned. What would you say are some of the risks to this, especially when we think of the global majority?
I'm super paranoid. feeding into my personal information about my own mental health, I think it's very, very scary. We don't know how that data set going to be used, and how it might be sold to some pharmaceutical company to create like a drug only and create more such things. So at this point of time, I actually find it a super scary thing. I know like we are using, and also what makes me even more scared is this push of AI to solve every problem. Like AI cannot solve my mental health problems. I need like a human touch or a human empathy to talk to. It can give me like 1 2 3 4. It can edit my document, or it can just do like a very clerical work for me. But if I am putting my mental health in AI hand, that's really, really scary for me. So I am like not a very big advocate for, trying to solve all human problem with AI. So that's going to be my response. Yeah.
Um, so, Richard, coming to you, you consider the inequalities of digital access to public services in your work. What are some of the most significant barriers preventing equitable access to AI-driven public services? And I'm taking the caution of Barsha's intervention just now. So, what are the strategies that could help address them?
Yeah, I mean, again, one of these sort of bigger questions, I think, and again, there will be differences in the global north and the global majority as well in terms of the what we call in the UK, and I'm not sure how widely the term is, a sort of digital divide. So who have the technology, and then also the digital literacy, and the kind of skills and access, and all of the infrastructure in place to use those technologies, and who doesn't. And I mean, the best evidence that we have is that often it's people in more rural communities, people in low incomes, people from marginalized communities as well, who lose out to this. But we do know that even having access to some of these things, has great benefits, so that there are real opportunities there. For like the UK particularly, like there's a new kind of government strategy with our current government to sort of really prioritize kind of AI enabled services. That's the big thing. Completely agree with what Bosch was saying. Like, I think as part of that raising of digital literacy, we also need to be really communicating what these technologies can do and should do, and what they shouldn't do. Like an example is, you may have seen kind of reported news about how ChatGPT can deliver bad news from that a doctor would deliver better than a doctor can. It can communicate complicated health information, um, in a more empathetic kind of way. And I recently read a discussion piece in the UK Guardian newspaper, which was really sort of flipping that on its head and saying, why are we judging ourselves by like the standard of the chatbot? A lot of these tests are, testing what the AI can do, but it's not recognizing all of the complex, messy context of human lives, and how a doctor is working like 12-hour days or longer, and somehow has to do all of the complex work of doing a diagnosis and then delivering the bad news as well. So, linking in with what we're talking about therapy and some of these other, things that I suppose policymakers might want us to be using, because it'll save lots of money, which is, often the imperative with these things. There are big, ethical questions about whether this is something we should be doing, and what are the challenges or complications that can arise, and how is that going to shift and change our culture, as well. Sorry, so many things again I could talk about, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Richard. Matthew, I'll come to you. So many people working in the domestic violence sector are worried about using AI. How can they incorporate it in a safe way that is supportive of the work that they do?
So the first thing I'll do is just sort of like some really great examples of the bad use of AI, but there are loads of good uses of AI. Exactly as Ashley has talked about what you're doing with the chatbot. And my wife, again, just to simplify things, my wife, after 2 years of me running an AI startup, we were having dinner. She said, "So what's AI then?" So we had the AI discussion, and I described it to her in my complex technical view, and she said, "Oh, so it's like an Excel spreadsheet with lots of spreadsheets and loads of pivot tables." And I sort of went, "Yeah, that's exactly sort of what it's like, except it just goes on forever, with obviously the right sort of data in it." But it really is just this kind of is what the marketing people 10, 15 years ago used to call big data. So it's just lots of data in a background for people that aren't well versed in this, and we're just choosing and using the data in the right way. And one of the things we do is we try and implement AI, which can be quite complex and ethereal, into a real world situation. We're currently working with No More on a project which gives our brand of AI to domestic abuse victims, right at the moment where they might be being removed from their local setup, their family, from an abusive partner. The last thing they want is to be disconnected from the world. And very often these days, that connection is through social media. They might be their best friends, their family, their kind of close network online. But this is also a space that can be quite fraught with danger, where alleged abusers or abusers can contact you in kind of covert ways. So we're trying to trial that you can use online social media, and the AI will detect the abusive messages, and then all the messages from your friends will be able to get through. So the thing to understand here is that it kind of goes back to what I was saying at the start, is the output is really important. Let's just focus on a very specific goal that we want to achieve. Very often people start off with, oh, let's use AI for something, as I did with my startup, but very often it can be a human-based approach or a slightly different approach through education, which maybe that could be delivered using AI, or maybe we just need some kind of humans to sit in front of other humans and do that thing. And I was really in some of the other comments just to peek into that. One of the things, I can't remember the name of the show, but there was a detective show on TV. It was on a Netflix or something. That there was this autistic character who would pick up micro expressions on the face of like alleged perpetrators of criminal activity. They'd stolen some money off a bank, that sort of thing. And I think that's one thing that I don't think AI can replace, is that human intuition. My wife was upset about something on Sunday morning, and I was able to pick up on the micro expressions that she communicated to me. She wasn't cross, she wasn't annoyed, she wasn't saying anything to anyone. But when you know someone and you understand someone deeply, you know that they're affected by certain situations. And I think that's the same for people that know survivors. They know they might walk into a certain situations, and there'll be micro expressions that they communicate that, I think we are a few hundred years away from having, Richard might correct me here, from having camera style chat AI camera based technology that will be able to pick up on those micro expressions that humans can pick up from each other. So, which is a refreshing thought for me. It's like the government's going to steal all our data. There's no way that if you've worked with any government agency across the globe that they are going to steal your data, because they can't keep it. So I think we're all safe from that perspective.
Well, thank you so much, Matthew, for your intervention. We are just towards the end of our session, and I'll just summarize what I'll try. I don't think I can summarize so much rich information that all our esteemed panelists basically spoke about. We need to be aware of harms as well as opportunities. There are really good services like Hope Chat, and I think if other and Revenge Porn Helpline as well. And if folks are looking into building products, I think there are like good examples out there that they can follow. I think bridging digital divide, which are like the existing structural issues when it comes to accessing technology, it's already there. But when it comes to AI and emerging tech, I think we really need to see the divide between global South and global North. And yes, need more resources, not just the willingness of the government, but resources and political willingness of the powerful governments around supporting these initiatives and AI governance across the globe. And with that, I'll ask all of you one last question, and please be brief with that. What is one single action needed to ensure technology is used to help and empower instead of harm? And I'll start with Sloan, and then we'll go to Richard.
So I want to echo what was said about education and healthy relationships education. And I am a preventionist at heart. And so I think on the ground, we need to start incorporating digital safety and healthy digital relationships. We need to start talking about chatbots. We need to start talking about all of the ways that AI and different types of tech are being used. And we need to bake it directly into our conversations about consent, boundaries, bodily autonomy, because these tech companies are moving at a breakneck pace, realistically faster than we can regulate them. And so the best way, in my opinion, to ensure that deep fakes are not created, undressing apps are not used, all of these harmful things are not happening, is that on the ground, people are choosing not to do it because they understand the implications.
Thank you so much, Sloan. Richard?
I wanted to say what Sloan said, but Sloan said it now, so I'll say something else. I think that's much more achievable than what I'm going to say. I want to see better legal and ethical frameworks internationally. I think it would, if the conditions were right, I think creating that infrastructure, collaboration internationally to really set standards, but also going back to what was said previously, making the process of development, having, the sort of ethical conduct, the equity, diversity, inclusion aspects as well into the design process, really setting kind of standards for that and expectations, I think would just, do wonders to really, produce better products that are better, suited for everyone.
Thank you, Richard. Ashley?
Sure. So I'll just say, in my opinion, the best way to address it is to not avoid it, right? So there's a reason why domestic violence is so pervasive. There's so many misconceptions and biases that make it hard for people to be believed and to be helped. So as people in this, gender-based violence space, I think it's so important that we embrace it, be skeptical of it, but we embrace it and we understand that the only way that we're going to make this technology work for survivors is if we get involved, have a voice, and come to the table.
Thank you, Ashley. Barsha?
One point is we need to look at TFGBV as more of a gender norm violence problem and not a tech problem. So we need to address it more of normative problem and not as a tech problem. And the second point, I totally agree with Richard. I think we need more strategic litigation in this. We need more, and we need more funding, especially for the global south, because it is multi-layered problems. So yeah, these two are my way forward.
Matthew?
Yeah, I'm in a difficult point going last. All great ideas have gone before me. I sort of think Richard's BHAG, big hairy audacious goal, is to coin a former economist, is really achieved by what Sloan was saying, really about you've got to educate people. I think if we educate parents, start there, because no one argues about children should be in safe places and should be looked after and cared for. But people should agree with all the other points we're making about adults as well. But that's something that no one can really argue with. And if we educate parents on what the risks are to children, I think a lot of those risks transfer into the gender-based violence and child sexual abuse. All these issues kind of come together in this space, and those parents will put political pressure, which will create political willing to do the things that we want them to do, and spend the money will then come flowing, Barsha, because there'll be political will. All of this stuff is eminently easy and possible to put in place. We just need the political will. So let's get the masses on our side, I think is the way forward.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for ending this on such a positive note. Thank you, Richard, Barsha, Sloan, Ashley, and Matthew for speaking at today's event. It's really my pleasure. It was very, very informative for me. And thank you, everyone, for attending our panel. Thank you.